Good evening, everyone. My name's Dr. Sam Hoffman. I'm a sports scientist and senior lecturer here at Deakin Uni in the School of Exercise and Nutrition Sciences. And I'm also co-director of the Deakin Women in Sport and Exercise Network. It's my pleasure to moderate this session for you this evening. And before we begin, I just want to begin by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional custodians of the land on which we're gathered today. We pay our respects to their elders and ancestors for allowing us to have our gathering on their land, acknowledge their continuing connection to this beautiful country, and thank them for their care and custodianship over many thousands of years. I extend this respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. Education has a long and rich heritage on this continent, which we aim to honour and reflect in the ways we teach and learn. So tonight is about leadership with purpose, what it looks like, how to do it and how to measure it. And it's my pleasure to introduce to you our panel members for this evening. Diana Taylor, AM. Diana is a renowned sports administrator, lawyer and company director whose leadership has shaped Australian football from grassroots to elite level. She served on the Geelong Football Club board since 2010 and became the club's first female vice president in 2019. In 2024, she was appointed a member of the Order of Australia for significant service to Australian rules football and to the Geelong community. And this year, she received a Deakin University Alumni Excellence Award. Chantella Pereira. Chantella is a sports executive and former dual elite athlete who applies on-court experience to fan engagement, events and participation growth. A four-time WNBL champion and former AFLW defender with West Coast, she now leads large-scale sport presentations and campaigns that elevate the live experience for fans and athletes. Last but not least, Alexandra Ash. Alex is a modern, impact-driven chief executive in sport and recreation. As CEO of the Y Australia, the national president of Royal Lifesaving Society Australia, she leads national movements focused on community wellbeing, water safety and youth empowerment. She previously served as CEO of Gymnastics Australia during a period of cultural reform and participation growth. Please welcome our panel. So to kick things off, I want to start by getting each of your perspectives on purpose. So purpose can sometimes feel like this big abstract idea, but in sport it often shows up in the small everyday choices. Can you each share a moment from the past year where you felt most connected to your purpose in sport and what impact it had on the people around you? Diana, can we start with you?
Thanks, Sam. If I could just start by saying that in sport, the purpose word is often almost seen to be something that's a little bit charitable and a little bit soft, which is really interesting because it's far from that and actually provides you with the guiding principles that you need to do everything else. So I think that there is commerciality, strength and leadership that is connected to that P word, that purpose word. And for me, having 25 years in the AFL, I see purpose every time I open during footy season a newspaper where I see community engagement from Auskick with both boys and girls, all gender participating, right through to the AFL at the elite level. And I decided that sport, but particularly Aussie rules football was the thing that I was going to be most passionate about. One, because I love the sport. Two, because I love the Cats. So, are there any Geelong supporters in the room? Not. Oh, okay. That's unusual. This is Deakin University, people. They are a sponsor. I made that choice because, in my view, Aussie rules, and I'm sure Chantelle will comment on this a little bit later, is the sport in Australia that creates the greatest catalyst for change. So it was that connection was the thing that was my driver, because having seen, I think, just about everything in footy, it is too hard to get up in the morning and keep going and be putting up with a measure of ridiculousness, rubbish, outstanding performance, great people, but also a whole lot of crap. if you are not anchored to something that's really important to you and that's going to be important to the people around you.
Great. Chantella?
Yeah, I think I can build on that almost as well. I think I really resonate with that, and I think being in women's sport, like as an athlete, I guess I've had a lifetime of it, of being part of it and experiencing it, and I guess seeing the inequalities, but also I guess firsthand living it. I think now that I work in it, I guess I've always had this purpose of, I believe that was where I belonged, and now I have the purpose of making sure other people belong there. But I realise now the opportunity should be that it should be more fair. I probably was just in this bubble of like, I want to achieve something and I'm going to do it. I probably didn't realise the inequities that I was experiencing. And now I'm anchored to this purpose of driving that to be more equal. And I had two kind of things that have resonated with me well over the past year is, and they almost talk to each other, but the community part is really what drives that, I guess, what we see at the top level or in that more mainstream broadcast side. I local footy club, went down to their presentation day just to do a little presentation to the girls in the football club, and walking into that room to see, probably 100 girls at the end of their footy season, at the local club in Murrumbeena, I felt really proud from, I guess, being, part of an inaugural AFLW team to then kind of going, oh, okay, this is actual change that is happening, even though maybe we don't always hear the stories in the press and what is what they deem as success and what is profitable. I think when you see that there is change happening, but we're not talking about those things. Like, we're not talking about the room of 100 girls that are now participating in football. And I think that for me is really good. I think we need to see way more of it. And on the flip side of that, I do a lot of work in APAC around live events and sport, and I've had the privilege of working on many large sporting events, men and women. I've recently spent some time in England during the Rugby World Cup, and being in that country and experiencing the way the audience engages with women's sport I actually realised how far behind Australia is. And I realised like they are genuinely engaged with women's sport as a society. And I feel like I saw a real purpose in how I was just walking through shopping centres and there were people stopping and watching two women's teams, not even England playing, I think it was like Canada and New Zealand in London, and they were stopping to watch a game. And I thought, wow, that's pretty good. Like, that is very, very intent purpose that is happening in that society. That is really great to see. I think women's sport in the UK has really risen and people are engaged with it. And I thought, and for me, I'm like, that community is now engaged. They're seeing their role models. They have that visibility to attach to. I think we're still missing that in Australia, and I don't feel like, I think we have the AFLW, but I don't think it gets the visibility it needs. Like, I think you have to find it still, and I still don't think we're kind of there. So I kind of go there is bits, like I walk into the club and I feel proud that's moving, but I walk over there and I go, wow, that's actual real change. So they're kind of two ends of the spectrum, I guess, in two different countries, but I guess it gives me hope that there's so much more potential that can happen here.
About you, Alex?
Make sure this is on, yes. Probably echo the sentiment that's here. I suppose the one decision, or the question about the decision, is as a parent. So my kids are 8 and 5, and so under 8s, everything started for our family this year, whether it be we had AFL, cricket, swimming, nippers, gymnastics, netball, anything that you can imagine. However, with that really highlights the role for sampling when it comes towards the sport and children. And so the decision for me when it came to my kids and being able to explore the possibilities for them is that give it a crack and give everything a crack and a go. We don't need the under-12s Australian champion, or we don't need the under-10s selected soccer team. Those are the things that I'm passionate about as well. And as a mother and or a parent, doesn't matter what type of parent that is, starting early to understand the importance of that sampling and the importance of giving it a go, and not just we don't have the scores on. Like, kids know the scores, they know exactly what's going on. But definitely through the Play Well strategy as well, the first national participation strategy for the ecosystem. Can you believe that we're in 2025 and it's the first time we've had an all-in type of strategy to do with participation in this nation? But that very much highlights in terms the need of sampling, the need of giving kids opportunities to thrive that is not competition.
Very interesting perspectives. Thanks for those reflections. I think that set the scene really nicely. So what I'd like to do now is to go a little bit deeper into what it really means to lead with purpose in sport, what lessons each of you have learnt along the way, and also some practical advice that you feel can make a lasting impact. Diana, if I can start with you. You've led across all levels of football, community, elite, tribunals and boards, as well as outside the game in law and education. So from that wide lens, what does leading with purpose actually look like in practice? And I guess underneath that, how do you make sure things like accountability, integrity and inclusion aren't just sort of thrown around lightly, but they actually show up in decisions, the culture and the outcomes that people can actually see and trust?
Thanks, Sam. And I'll also just add to that, I was Netball Australia's inaugural General Counsel from 18 to 21. So I've had women's professional sport and participatory sport experience, as well as obviously the AFL. So that was also an interesting insight, and I absolutely echo the statements that has been made here tonight already. So leading with purpose in sport is a challenging thing. And the reason for that is that there will be, if you're heading into the world of administration, whether that be boards or in paid employment, in the media, whatever that looks like, you get tested because the thing about sport, obviously, the end point is that, there's a winner, as you were saying, Alex, there's a winner. And you can't always win. Your cohort that you are serving can't always win. And sport does funny things to people if there's not a win. And there is an oscillation from week to week. And one of the things I picked up, I'm going to meander with this statement, if I may, Sam, for a little bit. One of the things that Brian Cook told me as the CEO of the Geelong Footy Club when I started there as a director in 2010 was, you've really got to keep yourself even from week to week. You cannot allow the wins and losses to be dictating how you're feeling, because that's going to impact on all of the people around you, and it's actually going to impact on your leadership. So the even moderation of yourself is critical. Leadership and leading with purpose, the fundamental part about that is knowing yourself, understanding what your own value system is, the line that you're prepared to step to but not prepared to cross. It's also about having enormous reserves of understanding, patience and the capacity to listen, because in sport, and Alex and I were talking about this before, everybody has an opinion. Everybody's entitled to that opinion. And often your job as a leader is to understand where that person is coming from, but also where that advice that's being provided sits in your own ecosystem as well. So leading with purpose means that you understand fundamentally who you are, but on the other end of that, you understand the participant, you understand the customer, you understand the key stakeholders and what they're all looking from you at you for your organisation and perhaps the wider sports context. I was at Geelong Footy Club 2012. I was the chair of the governance committee when the Essendon Football Club supplements episode occurred. And that really caused me to look closely at how I was leading, how much time I was actually, because, I'm a volunteer. I was a volunteer at the Geelong Footy Club. I wasn't a paid employee, but it actually doesn't make any difference. So how much time was I putting in? What development was I doing with the people directly around me? Because the thing I figured out about sport is unless you've got people, unless they're prepared to go over the trench with you, and that means having trust, and it means having a common goal, a purpose. If you're not really sharing in that broader purpose, then none of those other things are going to work. And if you are tested in an Essendon scenario, you may well be found to be wanting because you're not getting the information as a leader that you need. You're therefore not able to respond accordingly. And you need to be able to then respond without fear or favour, depending upon the information that comes through to you. So the picture I want to paint is one where you as a leader need to be absolutely rock solid. You need to be the calmest head in the room. You don't need to be the smartest head in the room, but you need to be respecting the opinions and the views of people around you. But understanding fundamentally why we are there is critical, and it is not whatever it takes. And I hate that slogan in sport. It is not whatever it takes, because if we don't know where the line is and we're not prepared to hold ourselves on the line with our decision making, we step over the line. And sport without integrity and sport without character is not anything that I think any of us want to be a part of, and it's not something that we want our kids participating in either. So I think, just as a starting gambit, Sam, knowing yourself, knowing your audience, knowing the people around you and what you're prepared to do or not do is going to give you the purpose that you need to make key decisions, because sport will test you.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Chantella, do you have any reflections?
I picked up on and it's probably, why I am why I've taken up some board positions now, and it's my way of being able to give back to sport, because I believe sport has set me up with the life I have now, and I believe I've got a lot to give back so that others can experience that. And I think a lot of what I was drawn to the way you talked about know yourself, and I think I'm still trying to work that out. Like, I've only just finished playing. I'm still trying to work out who I am and what my contribution to society and sport is now that I'm a former athlete, which in itself is not talked about enough. But I guess I really resonate with inclusion. I guess being I'm a first generation Australian, I'm of Sri Lankan background. What I now realise is that I'm very much a minority, both from a cultural perspective, but also as a woman and in sport. And I go onto boards. So I sit on the South Metro Junior Football League board and Women's Sport Australia. And I joined Women's Sport Australia first because I'm very passionate about advancing equity for women and girls in sport. I joined the Football League board for a very different reason. One, I guess, in the area I live in, I feel it's predominantly Caucasian people. I am married to a Caucasian person, and I have kids that I guess look predominantly Caucasian. But my fear is that I was there is maybe only a handful of Sri Lankan Australian athletes in our country, and I look at the demographic of our population and I go, that's an inaccurate representation of what we have in sport. And I believe that if we don't have that visibility, like we talk about visibility, like if, the saying, if you can't see it, you can't be it. I've kind of joined that board to see if I can influence what decisions and what thinking is being made around cultural communities. And so I really kind of drew to the inclusion part of what you said and leadership. And I guess I have a perspective that sitting in those board meetings, everybody's well-intentioned. But what I've really realised is that there's actually no intention to talk about it and to have a strategy around it. I don't think it's purposely done. But what I realise is that unless there are people in the room of diversity or, different genders, then we kind of unintentionally don't address it. And I think for me, the scrapping of the Office of Women in Sport in Victoria is they, put forward policies and I believe policy helps the foundations. I don't believe it's everything, but I do think it helps women get where we talk about board quotas. It is hard to walk into a room and be on a board if you're and I'm sure Diana can talk to this, but being the only woman in a room trying to, it takes a certain level of confidence and, self-belief. And I think if we can have a system that helps facilitate that and encourage that that's just an example, but if we can help facilitate the diversity of boards and leadership, then I guess for me that inclusion piece then becomes a bit more inherent in the way we think and influences society, because to go back to your very early point, sport is a catalyst for change. And we have this unbelievable ability in this beautiful country where sport, it's such a big connection point. And so I guess I'm really passionate now about how do we make inclusion part of inherent thinking and inherent, makeup of numbers. So I guess for me, I'd love to see more of that, and how do we all influence that in the absence of policies to help force that in.
That's really powerful. Thank you. Alex?
It's been alignment to strategy is the piece. So my day in the life of me being the CEO at the Y, I have 4 national entities as a group CEO, all with their own boards and chairs. I then have 12 associations that all have their own CEOs and boards and chairs. And so being able to navigate or circumnavigate sometimes some of those can only be done when you have some alignment. And so what are we delivering and what's the core to that alignment? I've made sure I've made some notes as well tonight to make sure that these meaty topics I've been able to prepare and make sure that it's the most for everybody. So thank you for allowing me to have my notes in front of me. Overt communication is so important. So over communicate for that purpose and for that connection. But at the end of the day, relationships are the biggest piece. My day in a life as well, I'm a relationship broker. I'm bringing people together. I'm getting them to have the best opportunity to make a good decision. And it's really hard then to make a bad decision. So that's sort of the frameworks that we think around. Again, it's the right people, the right bus and the right destination with no surprises. Whether I'm on a board, of course things happen, but the no surprises approach just builds so much trust in the way that you do it. I think, and then finally, it's the clarity as well. If you have alignment, you have clarity, you have a no surprises approach that builds that trust, then 80% of your work is done. It's the 20% that then you finesse.
Alex, if I can stay with you for a second, I want to expand on a few points actually that were already touched on, but specifically in your roles, you've led major reform efforts at both national and community levels, from steering cultural change in a sport under scrutiny, gymnastics, to shaping safe, inclusive environments across one of the country's largest community sport networks in the YMCA. In your view, what does it really take to lead that cultural change with purpose, especially when safety and well-being are on the line?
Again, it's who's at the centre of your decision making. So for us at the Y, as an example, we were the centre of a reckoning when it came to Royal Commission into childhood institutional abuse. And going through that reckoning is abhorrent. However, how do we then bring that to life today is every decision that we make, from a policy piece, from an everyday business piece as well, is young people at the centre, but also voice at the centre of what we do as well. Similar customer, but how we are bringing those customers together. So that's been the why piece, to the point that one of those 4 national boards that I have is called Why Safeguarding. So it is very much, we don't want to be the compliance flaw. Anyone can be the compliance floor. We want to be the bar. And so how do we make sure we get to that bar? So that's from a why perspective. From a gymnastics perspective, gymnastics is a sport that you start as perfect and you get deductions. So from there, through osmosis, was very much in terms of how an office was running. So wouldn't be handing in things until it's perfect, making sure the uniforms or your bra strap is not showing. Like, these things are a bit ridiculous in this day and age, right? However, that's what I was facing into gymnastics, that perfection, that getting judged in everything you do in that sport, and how that then led to the staff. So for me, in those sort of reforms, it was you need to celebrate every little win that you can, and also celebrate the mistakes and the things that haven't gone to plan to do that. But again, if I go back to my original comment in terms of who's at the centre of your decisions, whether it be my time at gymnastics or my time at the Y, it really was that athlete, and making policy changes that you need a whole lot of stakeholder input so that they get sick of having the input, and so they can see where you can progress. And for us at gymnastics, there were two really big pieces part of that reform. One was the body care framework, so policy, no weight management, no calipers, no weights, no nothing in terms of the sport, from high performance all the way down to community. And that was a really strong policy position that we went down and partnered with the Butterfly Foundation for. And the second one is to do with that uniform type of piece, right? How are we encouraging young girls, for instance, to do gymnastics if it is written into rules that you can't have your bra strap showing, you'll get a deduction? You're not allowed to wear shorts over your leotard because of the aesthetic. All these things are just, as I said, ridiculous. But when you're dealing with a whole lot of purists, and gymnastics is that purist type of sport, again, it's the relationships. And we're really proud in terms of that time, our gender diverse guidelines and also uniform was something that we could bring to little Sally. So when she jumps on the trampoline, she knows that if she goes up levels, she doesn't now have to wear a leotard, especially going through a puberty, for instance. So a whole lot of things there. Who's at the centre, and relationships are just the biggest part.
Diana, what are your perspectives on cultural change with purpose from a safety and wellbeing sort of lens?
It's a great question, because there's so many layers to safety as well. And in my day job in my law firm, I do child reportable conduct investigating. So I see it at the little end, and I see the impact that has on families, on the children, on the centres themselves, on the boards. It's just it just cascades, and it keeps cascading. So we need to get that right. I think that that in terms of safety and what we need to focus on in sport as well, I look at the scrutiny that elite athletes are under, and effectively every single day, and it's not just the day that they're on the playing field or the court, they're effectively going through an AGM. They're effectively going through a public process while they're performing. And that assessment of them doesn't stop there. It then proceeds into the room of computers, where they'll then sit down, and I used to see this at the club. The player would then sit down with the coach or several assistant coaches and go through and intricately assess why they made the decisions that they did. Chantella, of course, would have been through that process in two sports. And that... I think that can't help but play with your mind. And there's a certain level of resilience that's required for that. But I just wonder what the long-term impact is on individuals and humans who are forced to go down that pathway. That review piece is important, but I think how we're doing that, there's a safety element that needs to be wrapped around the athlete while that's occurring. I think the safety piece goes to the retired athlete as well. We've seen numerous stories of that not going very well because that lack of purpose, or the purpose that was there, is no longer there. And I've seen many athletes who just are unable to transition out of the day-to-day. And, Joel Selwood has done it very well, but he said in his final press conference when he was asked the question, well, what else have you had on? Where are you going? And he said, I'm all in. I was all in. There wasn't anything else. And that's exactly who Joel Selwood was and is. And he's applying that to other aspects of his life. But that singular focus to be the best is not something that translates well into mainstream society. And there's a safety element for the athlete that needs to wrap around that. And I also think too that for sporting environments outside the athlete, whether it's the paid employee or the board member or the volunteer or customer, whatever that looks like, none of those people, myself included as a board director, were going through the level of scrutiny that I was expecting an employee, being the player, to go through every single day. And I think that that people who are in leadership positions in sport are often not very good at holding that accountability mirror up to themselves and really putting themselves through the hard yards that they need to. So, and then, of course, we could get into the psychological safety and all of those elements too, Sam, which is just sitting around all of this. So I think that when I think about safety and what to do and how to manage it, you need to think about the role. You need to think about the individual. You need to think about the impact of conversations that are occurring and then what that support needs to look like around it. And to your points earlier, you can't be afraid to step into those conversations and have the difficult conversations. And, as a lawyer, there's going to be risk and legal liability associated with all of that. Concussion is another one as well when we look at safety elements. Whole lot of hard conversations that are going on at the moment, but they have to, because Max Rook has been brave enough to stand in front of Australia and say, this has been my experience. My condition has been caused by what occurred to me on the field. We've got to step into that, as uncomfortable as it may be.
If I may just add to that, when I was at gymnastics and we had a member restorative program as part of our pieces from a Human Rights Commission report and what that was. And I obviously won't break confidentiality in terms of what I'm going to say, but it's I had a ex-elite gymnast and she was part of that sort of restorative piece, and her words were she didn't realise she was still a child at 26 when she retired from gymnastics because of that coercive control relationship, because of the impact or the environments that these young women and girls were put through. She didn't have the skills, capabilities, understanding to even make her own decision. And so when she leaves that sport, and as I said, the age that she was then, having that reflection is huge.
It's interesting, right? Like, I think both of what you've said is very accurate, and I look at it and go, it's funny because imagine trying to give feedback to employees like coaches give athletes feedback. And I grew up in, I probably transitioned into the coach. So I started most of my career, and probably a lot of my basketball career was a lot of the coach can scream in your face. Like, that was still very acceptable. And, I'd be screamed at. I'd be like, this far away, even closer, like, shirt grabs, everything. That was all, and like, I'm 39. So this was not that long ago we're talking about. So I think, thankfully, I think things have improved, but, there's a level of resilience in that. And I think what you both talked about is it takes people, it's brave leadership from people to step up and speak out about their experiences to make cultural change. And it's not always bad. It can be good too. I think that athletes have this great ability to influence cultural change because of the presence, the brand platforms, the personalities and popularity that they have. And so we have this opportunity to speak up about things which can influence how we do things as society. And I think, I was thinking about gymnasts as you were just talking about that, and I thought, would the US gymnastics situation have ever come to light if those certain women didn't speak up about it, and therefore cause ripple effects of how now we treat gymnasts more globally? Like, I think that cultural change comes from, I think it's two parts. I think it needs people, unfortunately, it needs people to be able to be really brave and step up and speak up about what is going on. Hopefully there's not too many bad things, but I think also in a good light, we talk about how can you change the way things. I think you look at Alona Ma, who's a women's rugby player in America. She's, really beautifully been able to show the commercial value of women's rugby in the US, but also globally. And I think her stepping up and speaking about that has caused a real cultural shift. I think about what you talked about around the education, like it is so important for athletes and administrators around how we set up life after, but also the education. Like there's a beauty of women's sport at the moment where women still work for the most part. Most female athletes work. And we have the luxury of still knowing that we need to have two careers, that good or bad. There's good and bad about that. But the good of it is there's a life after sport. For male players, like the Joel Selwoods, I mean, some of them are more in a better position than others, but they don't know any other world. And the risk and the safety element of that is, and we're seeing it, and I'm very close to the Selwood family. I was very close to Adam, and the impact that there are on players post that, that risk and that safety element is huge. And we haven't acknowledged that as a society, I don't think. And I think the risk is that women's sport goes down the same path. And we have this opportunity, and I think this is the beauty of where women's sport is. We have the opportunity to shape that in a different way. And I think the way women's sport needs to be made is that it should be different. And let's learn from what's happened and change that. But I think it takes a lot of people to speak up to represent the community that sits underneath that. Otherwise, the change will kind of never happen. Cam
French, who's at the Sports Commission, I don't know if anyone's heard the story that he puts out when it's the Play Well strategy is sport in Australia is still you go to a bakery, but you're only open between 9 and 10 and you only sell white bread rolls. And so how do we move from that to an ecosystem that is mirroring our community and society? And for me, from my experience in terms of the cultural reform of the pieces you said as well, it's the measuring what matters. Human nature is you'll get rewarded on the things that are in your KPIs or what that looks like. So, for instance, in my KPIs at the Y, I don't have any financial type of KPIs because the purpose and the outcomes are not aligned to just money. Of course you need funding. Of course you need that reality. But measuring what matters and having KPIs that drive the behaviour is a big one as well.
That's great to hear. Chantella, I just wanted to ask you if you could, if there's any reflections on your two different sporting, scenarios. Is there anything that was, noticeably different between the two sports from that cultural safety and wellbeing perspective?
The biggest difference I saw was the funding. So, basketball is a top tier sport anyway. So, I don't even think I experienced the extreme ends of it, but I played basketball at the highest level, almost I played Australian junior levels. Really, and I was basically in a national program, and the level of support, infrastructure, salaries, medical, all of that, at that time, zero wellbeing support, to then first I walked into the Hawthorn Football Club, nearly fell over day one. You've got more support staff than players almost, and this was VFL level to start with. And this was when women's football wasn't as big as it is 10 years ago. And I was astounded at the level of support, administration, to then walk into the West Coast Eagles. into the facility. And I would say there was still a lot of inequities in that, but the level of support and I guess the structures and the systems that were in place for me as a player and me as a person was like night and day. So I actually don't know that basketball, I haven't been in it for a little while, but I guess I'm still relatively close to what's going on, and I don't know that the dial has shifted that much. I think we hope there's significant change with the new ownership of the WNBL, but I think being able to see the difference in those two systems when Australian women's basketball is one of the best in the world, to know that that level of funding and support is that vastly different, I think like that's a big problem for us as a society when basketball still a top tier sport. So you can only imagine at a gymnastics level or a table tennis or a rowing, like the levels that we would be seeing of the difference in that support. So I think that's where I talk about there's still a long way to go. And for Australian sport, we're primarily government funded. And that's the biggest difference when you look overseas and where there's private investment, there's significant commercial partnerships. Like the model is very different. And I think in order for us, and I know like our population's different, but we do pretty well considering what we have. But, you know, I think actually Australian sport really needs to look at like the way we are set up because it has the opportunity, but our model, like I think the government model, like we talk about the play well strategy, which is, you know, it's not good that we're talking about it in 2025 that's the first time we have a national participation strategy. We don't have a national women's and girls strategy. Like that doesn't exist. So, you know, I struggle to see how it continues to get better. And I fear that the AFLs of the world and the very tops, they continue to grow, which is awesome for those participants. But what happens to the rest of Australian sport? And I fear that inequity will continue to grow across the variety of sports that we have.
Mm. Yeah, that's really interesting. The international perspective is a really good one, isn't it, to keep in mind? So much we can learn. Chantel, if I can just stay with you for a minute. You've lived the full spectrum of sport, so from junior leagues right through to elite competition, from athlete to mentor and now into leadership across both commercial and advocacy spaces. And when you look at today's sports pathways, so this kind of extends on what you were saying there, but especially women and girls, where are we falling short for them specifically in making those pathways purposeful, safe, and also sustainable? How do you,
Yeah, I think it's probably building on what I was talking about. Like I think we talk about the variety of sports and we should have that ability for anybody to play whatever they want to play, but not be at a disadvantage because of what they choose. And I think you get the dropout rates because maybe they don't have the right level of funding or maybe they don't have the facility. Like we know that girls at like 14, they drop out because of various reasons, but a lot is because they don't have access to a change room. They don't have uniforms that suit what they need as a female. And I think that's what I think hasn't really become uniform across our country. I think there's I think because we are a government structured country, that without a national policy and advocates and resources behind it, there is nowhere else for funding to come from at this point. Like I think it's going to take a little while for us to get up to where we see things internationally. So I fear that I think there's still a lot of work to be done across participation, across other codes. I think it happens. It's okay in many sports, but I would say even in AFL land, like when we go to community level of football, we're still struggling on facilities. And that's a really big thing. If we want girls to play sport, then like we have to make the environment something that they want to participate in. And I think we're trying, but I don't know that the infrastructure and the resources behind it is keeping up with that. So I feel like the two are not, they're not aligned. I think we have a great vision and there's lots of great advocates like us in the room, but we can only go as far as we can go. You need people to be able to action those things, and it does take money and it does take people in influential positions to make some of those things happen, with us behind it, pushing it.
Yeah.
And if I could just add to that, so as you were talking, I was thinking about the broadcast deal that I was involved with Netball Australia, and there've been, I think, at least one broadcast deal since, and there was a very traditional model of commercial value that is still placed on all of these discussions, whether it's netball, whether it's rowing, whatever it is, and that usually starts with the eyeballs context, and then it starts with the what can we make from streaming, and then it's the advertising dollar. Well, how about if you're a national business, when you've got people of diverse backgrounds, whether that's gender, whether it's culture, we're actually creating a better society. We don't have the levels of domestic violence that we've got in this country at the moment. We've got people who are fit and healthy, so that keeps everybody out of hospitals. We also create social cohesion and remove loneliness. So that's just three of the drivers that are present and are created by people like us who are involved in sport. So how about business starts thinking about it in terms of those concepts with that level of criteria, as opposed to where we are currently now, because we are so stuck. And it just seems as though the American market, and I've really got myself into, their football league over there and soccer and all sorts of things that they're doing. I know there's a lot of money washing through that system, but to your point, we need to find a way to get business to be looking at sport and investing in a different way. And the criteria that we are currently using, it's just broken. And we need to throw it out and we need to start again.
Okay, and that is the best point, right? We have to look at it differently. And I talked about women's sport not following the men's sport model, because we end up in that comparison, right? You get the headlines of it doesn't make money, and it's not true, because men's sport didn't make money 50 years ago either. So why aren't we talking about that? Like, if we're going to put a broadcast deal on because broadcast drives the money, and we're comparing it with that model that is eyeballs and the same model that is used to evaluate men's sport right this moment, you're not comparing apples and apples here. So we have to find a different model for women's sport. It's its own entity, it's its own unique property, and it needs its own model of value for broadcast deals, for commercial partners, for engagement, for fans, for participants. Like, it's a whole different model. It's a whole different product. It's not just, it's not a T-shirt for men and then a T-shirt for women's. It's a whole different thing. It's got its own characteristics, its own personality. And I think until we change the way we talk about it and the attitude and our way of perceiving that, it's going to be very hard to change this mindset and break it, because it has to be foundationally different attitude towards it.
I think I hope many would maybe mirror my comment. It's not. If you started again, you wouldn't have federated type of approaches, would it be, to sport? Like, I don't wake up every morning and go, yes, I get to deal with the federated structure again today and have significant feedback from my 12-member associations that all have 14 personalities each. So it's, that structural piece to get to what that change needs, there's just so many hygiene factors that can be addressed, but then people go to, it's too hard, so we won't do that. And you're right, to the funding piece, traditionally from Sports Commission, participation funding is just a bums on seats exercise. And so them being tried to change and amend that is fantastic, but it still sneaks back to a bums on seats exercise or the amount of gold medals that you win.
Absolutely, as you say, and that's the easiest. That's where people go. So
path of least resistance.
Yeah. In the interest of time, thank you so much. Don't go anywhere yet, though. So I guess just to sort of capture, I guess, what was talked about. Obviously, the focus for this evening was leading with purpose, and we covered so many different pathways and examples and practical little insights as well. About real decisions, culture, how to drive meaningful change. There were some really amazing examples that you each gave, which was so interesting. And the safety and well-being perspectives as well, which is something I think we always need to keep in the front of mind. And the practical steps that we need to build pathways that truly work, don't just exist, but they actually work, and we can evaluate change. So with that, we'd love to open the floor to our audience. Did anything come into your mind as you were listening? Do you have any questions, reflections, or challenges of your own that you'd like to bring into the conversation? You can have a specific question for a panel member or a general one that any of them could jump into. Over to you.
Awesome, thank you. Just a question for anyone who wants to answer it. You discussed a lot of the night the difficulties we have going forward and the changes that need to be made. What gives you security, or what do you draw confidence on to make those hard choices or to make those decisions going forward for the change that's necessary?
From a personal perspective, yeah. For me personally, I have this burning sense in me that I just need to do what's right. You know, I'm just there to do what's right. And if I don't do what's right, even though there's a cost that comes with that, there's always a cost for leadership, always. I know, I'm not going to sleep at night, but I'm going to continue to ask myself questions about who I am and why I'm here, and if I'm prepared to compromise on that, what am I also prepared to compromise on? It's so important to have people around you that you trust, and whether it's mentor, executive coach, just the person down the corridor who'll give you an honest view, because before you act, you often need to test out where you're heading as well. And I think knowing what you're prepared to walk away from. I started in Australian rules football when I was 23 years of age, as a young lawyer sitting on a tribunal in the Western Region Football League. Even at that stage, before I even had dreams of getting into the AFL, I said to myself, if I'm put in a position where I need to make a call, and this means that today's the day I need to walk away, then that's what I need to do. Every day I have to be prepared to walk away if it's going to compromise me. So I think once you've looped that around yourself, it puts you in a strong position, and you've got armour on every day when you've got that sorted.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, up the back, Aidan.
Thanks for the talk. My question is about, you talked a bit about different themes like inclusion, safeguarding, culture of sport. And I think one group, being officials, referees, umpires, is a group that relates to a lot of those different things and is often neglected in these conversations. Just curious to get your thoughts on, how they sit in this conversation. And just, one of the, I guess, sort of analogies that resonated with me was a bakery analogy. And I always think about the analogy where you never go to the supermarket and abuse a 14-year-old for packing something wrong in your bags, but then it's socially acceptable. I do that in inverted commas because it's not, but it is, to abuse a 14-year-old at a football, netball, basketball court. So, yeah, just curious for your thoughts on that.
I'm happy to open. So traditionally in that official, education space, or what that is, we teach skill, right? So like the skill of the forward roll or the skill of whatever. However, it's more than that. It's how do you engage that Jack who never wants to engage in class, but you've got group teaching, understanding and training to be able to get Jack to participate, let alone do a forward roll. So from an official's point of view, in terms of education, when I was at gymnastics, we made that huge shift to get a coaching qualification or whatever that looked like. It wasn't about the skill that you're teaching. Yes, when you get higher, that's important, but it's around the methodologies, the getting kids to have the best experience that they can, all of those sort of metrics, as I said, rather than the skill acquisition. And that's just so important from, as I said, that under 12s type of piece. So to your point around officials or investments of what that is, it's changing the needle there, because then those kids will be the future of them, and they can see how you've been able to role model, or they've been able to role model. Coaches, officials, you can't have a game without an official. Well, you can, but it'd be tricky in terms of who thinks is right and wrong. But I have to say, from a Sports Commission point of view, they've put a lot of energy towards that modern coaching approach, which is so important. But on a side note to that, volunteerism in this country, or across the world most probably, is getting harder and harder to engage and facilitate. So again, what's that purpose? What's the impact or change that we're making? What's the social logic models that you can demonstrate as well are just so important.
I'll just add, I think the other part, it's probably builds on what I was talking about around cultural reform. I think we don't place value on those roles. Like, I don't think, we don't have anyone that talks about umpiring as in a positive light. When we hear about umpires, it's all negative, right? Even, if we talk about it AFL level, there's a lot of work being done to change that, but it's not enough. It's inherent in our behaviour and our attitude around those roles, I guess, don't advance or help the experience of sport, which is like the complete opposite of what it does. But I don't think we place enough value on it. We don't pay those roles the same. I don't know across everything, but I would assume that is not a paid role in equal to what happens on the field. So when we say we can't run a match without the officials, but we pay them way less, that actually doesn't place the value on it. So I think there has to be actual cultural shift in the way we talk and advocate for them and give them visibility on how they're perceived to be able to help. But you probably have a better real life knowledge.
Yeah, I'm going to go a bit harder. I think, and thank you, it's a great question. And when I was president of the Western Region Footy League, I really lent into the support that needed to be provided for officials, because my goodness, is it a tough job, and it is incredible people who do that role. I think that what we need to do is have the courage to have a penalty system in place that makes it hurt if you do the wrong thing. So by way of example, if in the AFL, an AFL coach was required to have a week out from coaching because of a negative statement that was made about the umpires, and that happened once, maybe twice, we wouldn't have that issue anymore. And then we wouldn't have that issue cascading down to club level. That's a sports administration and a governance response to that. But I think that if we were strong enough to enforce that in the country, then that would change the game. But the problem we have is that there's this culture in this country where umpire and official bashing is actually part of the sport. It's part of your day. And it's abhorrent, and we've got to get it out of sport in this country.
Got time for one more. Aaron. We might be able to fit in two.
I was really interested in the conversation around how, I guess, some of our sporting codes and leagues are stuck in their ways, and, that means they can't grow. And I was thinking a good example of this is, the new Tasmanian team coming into the AFL, and the government's arguing about building them a stadium. And you contrast that with, the National Football League, where some billionaire just comes in and builds his own stadium or whatever. And I guess I'm just interested in extending that conversation, understanding, how we potentially get past that, or how you can, if you see those things changing and how it might happen. Because I struggle to see that big of a shift in Australian sport, but I think you guys are right that it needs to happen for them to grow.
Yeah, I think that if I was trying to repackage everything, you can't create too much fear in people, and Australia doesn't do change really quickly. So I think that I would start with the piece that I was talking about earlier in terms of where business sits in the country and what can be done to incentivise business to invest. I think that that's where I'd started. This conversation always goes back to the salary cap issue in professional sport in terms of where the money is and who is doing what. So I think that the governance that sits around that piece needs to be a whole lot stronger. But I think that if you had government incentivising business to come and do business in Tasmania, which was then funding a stadium, that might eradicate some of the issues that you were experiencing as well. But I think the first question is, why do we need the money and where's the money going to go? Because the money doesn't need to go to highly cashed up marquee elite athletes. The money needs to be distributed around the system. So I think the question is, where do we get the money from? But also then how is it going to be used, and what's the pipeline associated with that? That's as best I can do without notice. Thank you.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think around the business model, like we have seen some instances of it where it is changing the game. It hasn't changed facilities yet, but it will be interesting to see where we are in 5 years in basketball. Like I think the model of the NBL has been very interesting to watch. If you watch what Larry Kesselman's done with the NBL League and the way that league and organisation is slowly changing what is happening in sport and entertainment in Australia, like it will be very interesting to see if that influence and that power can result in more facilities, more infrastructure, therefore more fans. And I think at the end of the day, like that, I think we've kind of all said it across all of us, like what happens as a result of sport? Less domestic violence, more people employed. What is the flow-on effect? So if there's a way for us to articulate that where it gets to the people who are making these decisions at the top and for them to understand the impact, I feel like that is where we can have change. But it's unfortunately going to take people like Larry Kesselman to run a league and show us what can be done, because I think that's unfortunately where like the Australian landscape's at.
Thanks. First of all, thanks for the talk. It was really insightful. I just had a question for Chantal. If you had to create one policy tomorrow for visibility and cultural diversity in sport, especially for women, if you had no barriers, what would it be? And yeah, I'd love to know.
Oof, that's a good question. Look, I think what I've found the most powerful thing is around the way decision making is achieved. So I probably have only really experienced this lately because I think I'm probably more exposed to the way organisations are run and how decisions are made. And I guess my experience in that now shows me that if we can have people at the table, then I think we will end up in a really good place. And so if I had to put one thing out there, I was like representation. So if we had representation where decisions are being made, I think we will make a lot of change very quickly. And that would be my thing.
I think it's if you're not inclusive, you're exclusive. So in terms of it's a no-brainer when it comes to those type of pieces, most definitely.
And I'm very much in favour of quotas now. I wasn't. I've now moved there because the older I get, the more impatient I get.
How do we do it though? How do we make sure that we're getting the representation?
Well, we're a government-driven sporting world, and government just needs to legislate, and people don't get their money unless we have quota that looks like X. They could do it. Labor's done it in its own political party. It can be done.
Yeah. Money talks.
Can I just say, even if we need the government to do it, but you can do it in your organisation. So implement it, make it a policy, make it a rule, put it on your board, send it up, put it in your management, make your SLT 50-50. Like we can actually do it ourselves, even though it should be done at the top.
Yeah, starts somewhere, doesn't it? Yeah. Well, I think we have now run out of time. Thank you so much. Could everyone please join me in thanking our amazing